Welcome to Cross to Cross Conversations. I'm your host, Monica, and here at Cross to Cross, I believe every voice matters. Every story deserves to be told, and the conversations we're told not to have are often the very ones we need the most. This is a space for honest conversation. Real stories, hard questions, uncomfortable truths, and yes, we will even have some fun sometimes. At life's crossroads, those moments where you're forced to choose between staying silent or speaking up, that is where your voice has power. If you've been silenced, dismissed, or told your story doesn't matter, this podcast is for you. No topic is off limits, no story is too messy, no voice goes unheard. This is Cross to Cross Conversations where silence meets voice. Come on in and let's have this conversation. Welcome to Cross Conversations. My name is Monica, and today I have with me Reverend Elaine Briefman. Now, what's exciting about this episode is that this episode is the first episode under the new name Cross to Cross Conversations. And what better way to talk about Christian leadership on the first podcast episode. So today I have with me Reverend Elaine Briefman. She is a pastor, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and ministry coach who equips Christian women leaders to heal from identity abuse, reclaim their God given calling, and lead with confidence. She brings together clinical insight, lived pastoral experience, and a deep love for the church to help women move from self doubt to spiritually grounded leadership. As the founder of Her Church, Her Call Collective, Elaine supports women pastors in building ministries that create real, lasting transformation in their communities. Her voice is warm, practical, and hope filled, inviting leaders to lead from freedom rather than striving. That last part is so powerful, Reverend Elaine. Thank you for joining me today on this first episode under Cross to Cross Conversations. How are you today?
I'm doing well, and thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor and it's a joy to be able to speak into the lives of people. So thank you for this opportunity.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, I met you a couple of years ago under your platform, Women Rocking Ministry. I love the name. We're going to rock it. But I would like to ask you really quick so the audience will know, how did you come about Women Rocking Ministry and how did it evolve up through today?
It's kind of a funny story, Monica. I I was doing a webinar training program, and it was under Women Rocking Business. And so I was doing this training program, and they said, do this, do that. And we're going to do a webinar and do all these things to have this webinar. And they said, you can copy everything that I do, just make it your own. So I was sitting there thinking, well, okay, I'm just doing, and I was really not putting a lot of thought into it, like really deep prayer or anything like that. And I thought, well, she's successful, so I'm just gonna mock it all up. And I did Women Rocking Ministry, and I took the graphic, which was her highest converting graphic, and
Yes.
just put it, hers was Women in Business Wanted, and I put Women in Ministry Wanted. I mean, I literally mocked it up exactly like hers, only put my own stuff in it. And I had 2,500 women sign up for that one
Wow.
webinar.
Wow.
And I
Just
thought,
that
oh,
first one.
okay, there must be something to it. So the Women Rocking Ministry literally came out of that. And so I bought the URL, womenrockingministry.com, and then changed the name of my Facebook group and just kind of ran with it.
Oh wow, that's interesting. I know exactly who you're talking about, by the way. I went through that same program. So
Yeah.
that's awesome. So, tell me about how you've evolved today. What are you doing today? How are you helping women? I know you have other flat platforms and things that you are doing.
So I really love, I always tell everybody that my ministry and my passion is your ministry success. And so my mission
I
is that
love
your
that.
ministry is successful. So whatever I can do is to help you be successful. So I do all sorts of trainings on my own to help elevate what I teach. So I do one-on-one coaching, I do group coaching. I do have a book which was made before I went into coaching, predominantly to help people who think they need therapy but aren't really sure what they need, because people would come into me. I did therapy in an office for 17 years, and people would always come in and I'd have to repeat myself over and over again of all these basics. And so I thought, what if I just put them in a book and they could just read the book and I wouldn't have to keep repeating myself. So,
That's smart. So cross to cross conversations is always about bringing voice to silence. And today you're speaking about something that's rather powerful. We already, women in ministry already have some challenges about what people believe and all of that. But sometimes there are things that sabotage ourselves. We do it to ourselves sometimes. And that's what you're going to talk about today. And I don't want to take over any more time. What she's talking about today. So Pastor Elaine has a powerful talk about healing the wound beneath self-doubt, identity abuse in Christian leaders. So I'm going to go ahead and allow her to speak to that. It is a powerful topic. I can't wait to learn more. Every time I hear it, I learn something new. So Elaine, go ahead.
thank you so much. So I start my story by going way back, all the way till the time when I was born, believe it or not. I was adopted as a baby. And when I was about 8 years old, my adoptive mom called me to the living room. And this was in an era where you were to be seen and not heard. And I figured I was in trouble for something, or I had a chore to do, because that was really the only time that we were addressed. So I walked down the hallway, and my mom is standing in the doorway of the living room, and I'm standing next to the wall heater, and I can see past her, my dad sitting on the couch behind the newspaper. And she looks down at me and she says, "Well, your brother tells me that your dad's been doing stuff to you. Is that true?" And I just remember in my mind going crazy, thinking, okay, I'm not supposed to lie, but he's sitting right there, and I don't know what to say. So I just kind of stammered out a yeah. And she turned and she looked at my dad and she said, "Is that true?" And he says, "I don't know what she's talking about." And he never looked up from the newspaper. So we kind of had this really weird conversation. And one time he said, "I don't recall what she's talking about." And I said, "How can you not recall? It happened yesterday. It happens all the time." And I got really mad, and I was yelling. And I remember thinking, my mom's going to slap me at any minute, because you just don't yell at your parents. I'm like, you just don't do that. But nothing happened, and nothing changed. And he never looked up from the newspaper, and nothing changed. And so when you're lied about or lied to, and you have these experiences, it can damage your sense of self, your sense of reality. And what I learned in those moments is that if I have something really, really important to say, that no one's going to listen, and it's not going to matter, which also meant that I don't matter. And so what ended up happening is I started living behind a mask. And so I would just become whoever I needed to be in any given moment, wherever I was at,
Mm.
whichever situation I was in. And I didn't really have a sense of self. And so, it really caused a lot of damage in my life. I was hospitalized 5 times in 1 year by the age of 30, for mental health reasons. And and so I just tell people, that kind of stuff will jack you up, and it really jacked me up. And so I did what any good jacked up person would do. I became a licensed marriage and family therapist and an ordained pastor. So I just tell people I'm a high paid codependent. You might be codependent, but I just get paid more than you do. So I went on, oh my gosh, 11 years of college, and I did therapy in an office for 17 years, and saw people from all across the spectrum. And but one day I was sitting on my couch, and I was really frustrated by the fact that people would over identify. I want you to hear that. They would over identify with the worst thing about them. Like they would think of that worst thing, and they would over it, like that's their identity, was this bad thing about them. There would be all this good, and they would ignore all the good and really focus on the bad. And so I'm sitting there thinking, why would anybody do that? And I had one particular client who was blowing up their life because they were focused on this thing, and they were causing all this drama, but they were good looking and talented and educated and skilled and all this. And it's like, but they're blowing up their life. And I'm like, why? And I heard two words. Would you like to know what they are? It's identity abuse. Identity abuse. And I'm thinking, what is identity abuse? Like, I'd heard of physical abuse and I'd heard of sexual abuse, but I mean, how does your identity get abused? Like, that's too ethereal. And so I spent 3 days with God and all of my clinical knowledge and sat there and said, okay, if my identity that God gave me was abused, what would that do to me? And what I realized as I looked through the DSM, it was a DSM-4 Diagnostic and Statistics Manual, the fat book for diagnoses, that it explained so many of the emotional disorders. So there's mental disorders, which means my brain doesn't function right, and then there's emotional disorders where my emotions are out of whack. And and I was just stunned every time I'd read another one and read another one, going, wow, if my identity was abused, that would create this and this and this and this. And what I realized for myself was that my identity was abused before I was old enough to know I had an identity. So I lived with that perception of my identity all the way until adulthood and had no idea that there was even an option to think differently about who I was. And so I went back to my church. I was in a church that was fairly large, and we had a huge staff of about 18 people, and they let me do a counseling moment every staff meeting. I don't know how that ever happened, but so I would go in there and he's like, "Do you have anything to share today?" And I said, "Yes." I said, "You're not going to believe what God showed me." It's like, and I went to the whiteboard and like, our identity is, if our identity gets this happens and this happens, this happens. And I said, "Do you understand?" And I was like so excited. And everybody's kind of looking at me like I have two heads. It's like, I don't know what you're talking about. But 3 days later, one of the staff members texted me and said, "Thank you so much for sharing about that, because it shows how the enemy has been derailing my ministry." And the following Monday, I had a client that came in who was a narcissist. And I think this is also important information. He was a narcissist, and the psychology world trains you that narcissists can't be healed. I want you to know that that's a lie. I don't think if you're trained that you should try to heal them, but I think it's important for you to understand that they can be healed. And so this guy came in, he had blown up his life, and I'm like, "Okay, so do you have anything you'd like to talk about today?" And he's like, "No, not really." I'm like, "Well, I have something I really want to talk to you about today." And I was like, so I said, what is the most negative thing that you think about yourself? And he says that I'm never going to be good enough. And I said, when is the first time you ever remember thinking that about yourself? Can you remember back that? And he goes, "Oh yeah, super clear. I remember when I was X and my aunt and uncle and told the story." And I said, and this is all I said, "You do realize you don't have to believe that anymore." And he said, "You mean I never have to prove myself again?" And I said, "No." And he cried for 20 minutes, nonstop. And through that experience, he left a changed person. Because most narcissists have really chronic low self-esteem. They're damaged in ways that they can't handle more pain about themselves, and so they lift themselves up to make bigger and bigger and bigger because they can't handle the thought of feeling that feeling again of low self-esteem. And seeing all of my clients just really grasp that their identity has been given to them by God and not by people just saying things to them. I was seeing all these people get set free. And so I spent some time in thinking, all right, if from a clinical perspective, what are the specific steps that I would take somebody through who's had their identity damaged, and as a Christian, to help them heal from that? And so I went down the stream of paying attention to some Christian entrepreneurs, and I created the Identity Abuse Busters course, and I bought the URL identityabuse.com. And it was funny because when I started talking about that, you own identityabuse.com, and I'm like, yeah, because like nobody's ever talked about it before, and they're God's words. Like I tell people all the time, those are God's words about what happened to you. It's not something I made up. Like I was sitting there asking, and God just dropped that into my brain. And I remember asking somebody, "Why me? Like why would he tell me that?" Like it was such a powerful message. And so eye-opening for so many people. And my friend said, "Well, because you always say yes." And I'm like, oh, okay. So it's been a mission of mine to make that phrase as common knowledge as possible. So I did the course in person. It just happens to have 12 steps. It wasn't intended to be a 12-step program, but I did it in person at my church just to see if it worked. And it was amazing, the revelations that people were getting about the messages that they heard about who they were and what they believed about themselves and where those messages came from. And And then I did it one time for children of divorce. And this was probably the most remarkable in-person one that I had, because I had a 7-year-old all the way through like 17, 18-year-old. And I had a 21-year-old client, and she's like, I want to go. And I'm like, it's kind of more for kids. She goes, no, I really want to go. And I'm like, well, she goes, no, I want to go. I'm like, okay. So I had this really wide range of kids in this room going through this process. And it was super, super interesting. At one point, they all looked at each other and they realized they can't be the reason why their parents got divorced, because they had all owned this identity of, I'm the reason why my parents divorced. If I had been better or done this or done that, it wouldn't have happened. And that to me was just a fascinating, I mean, I can't, it was just such a freeing moment for them. This God ordained freedom of, I can believe who I am and not attach these things to myself. And so, just so that people know, there's like the three overarching themes of the process is that you have an identity that can be discovered. I mean, you do have a God-given identity that can be discovered. And then the second one is the enemy is going to lie to you about that every moment of every day. And you can learn how to defend yourself. And then the third is choice. And this is really hard for people, but you can choose to believe what is true even when it doesn't feel true. And that's the biggest jump for most people. And the hardest part about having your identity abused is that you believe you can't ever change. You believe your identity is so fixed in this moment that you can't change. And so there's a disregard of, you can be better, you can be free, you can be whole. And it's like, no, I don't believe that I can ever be better. I've had clients come in and they're like, I'm so jacked up, I'm going to be in therapy forever. And I'm like, no, you're not. And they're like, no, you don't understand how jacked up I am. I'm like, yeah, but I do. And you won't be. And they really have a hard time believing that they can be set free. So part of the process is understanding you can be set free. If there's one thing that I could get people to believe, it's you can be set free from this. And so I have a little graphic that I scribbled out this morning. I usually have this nice big poster, but it wouldn't fit here. And so this is a picture that I tell people all the time: draw this on your paper, and then draw it on a napkin at a restaurant when you're out with somebody, and share it often. So this is kind of how we feel. I'm inadequate. So there's you, and there's this feeling of like inadequacy, unworthiness, incompetence. I shouldn't be here. I'm not good enough, not educated enough, which is a very common one. I don't have enough practice. Like I haven't done this long enough to be validated to be doing it now, this kind of thing. This is often, it just envelops who we are. It is our identity. So this is what the enemy wants you to believe. So I want you to be very clear. This is the enemy's picture of what he wants you to stay in. But this is what is true. You have been designed by God. There's an identity that he gave you, and you're unique in and of yourself. And the enemy wants you to believe that you're having a feeling of being unworthy or incompetent or incapable or whatever. It's just a feeling. You're having a feeling. And if you can, in those moments, recognize the feeling that most commonly you associate with inadequacy, and pay attention to the literal feeling, like I'm having that feeling, and be able to say, oh, there's that feeling again. When you get to that point, you can say, oh, there's that feeling again. That moment when you've identified the feeling gives you the option to say, I'm not going to own that as my identity. It gives you that moment of choice. So again, we're talking about you can choose to believe truth even when it doesn't feel true. So you're having this feeling that feels very real to you. You feel very inadequate, very incompetent, but this is what the enemy wants you to stay with as who you are, rather than just a feeling that you're having. And so really understanding that you have a God-given identity is super, super, super important. And so I have a little story that I like to tell about who you are, so that you understand that God really truly gave you an identity. And this is based on Psalm 139. And so after I tell you the story, I recommend that you go back and read it slowly, and read it from a perspective of God is love. And so Miss Monica, I'm just going to tell it to you since I can see you. So I'm going to tell you the story about the day that God made Monica. And those of you who are able to watch or hear, I want you to pay attention to the words for yourself as well. So there was a day that the God that we love, that we serve, that made the grass and the flowers and the trees and the mountains and the stars, stopped everything he was doing. And he said, I think I'm gonna make Monica. And he thought about you. And he held out his hand, and his mighty hand, and he swirled the cells of your body with his index finger of his other hand and just swirled them around. And he thought about the color of your eyes and the color of your hair and the shape of your toes. And he was so excited. He's like, angels, check it out. I'm making me a Monica. And they're like, wow, God, you've never made anything like that before. And he said, no, Monica's different. Monica's different than anything I've ever made before. And the way she sees the world and responds to the world is going to be different than anything I've ever made before. And he thought about your favorite food and your favorite color and your favorite animal. And he says, this is good. He says, Monica, I love you. I love you so much. Everything about you matters to me. The things that bring you happiness and joy, but also the things that bring you sorrow and pain, it all matters to me. And it's my hope for you, as it is for everyone, that when I put you in the world, that you have two parents that tell you every day how much you matter to me, every day. Now, some parents will do their job really well, and other parents not so much, and some parents aren't around, and then sometimes bad people do bad things to good kids. And Monica, the world's going to come along and say, you don't look right, and you don't sound right, and you don't live here, you don't know these people, you don't have this stuff, you don't drive this car, you don't. Every day, thousands of messages will bombard you. And it might get really hard for you to hear my voice and to remember how much you matter to me. But Monica, I want you to know that every moment of every day, I'm right by your side. No matter where you go, and no matter what you do, I will never abandon you. And I have all these angels as well that can come and minister to you. All you have to do is ask, and we'll be right there. And Monica, I also want you to know that I will never be disappointed in you. I might be disappointed in some things that you say, or some things that you do, or even some things that you think about, but I'll never be disappointed in who you are, because you are exactly the way I created you to be. And I am your biggest cheerleader. And I am looking forward to seeing you again someday and welcoming you home and giving you a great big hug. And I hope you remember that every day for the rest of your life. I hope that message sits with you for a moment and pay attention to where it resonates with you. Where's that space within you that needs to hear the deep, profound, intimate love of God? And allow that to be that space where you ask God to enter in and sit with you regularly, to be able to walk in that truth every single day. So I hope that somewhere in all of this, you've heard the truth about who you are and how the enemy is going to do whatever he can to dissuade you from believing that every single day. You can choose to believe the truth and walk in it every day. And I also wanted to let you know that 13 years later, the police came knocking on my door, and I was able to tell the truth. And my dad did go to jail. So I am proof, and you can be too, that the truth will set you free. So thank you for listening.
Wow. I mean, I'm over here in tears. Okay, sorry, let me do this right. Okay, sorry. I did not expect to be delivered during this podcast. Okay. This is why I don't edit my podcast. This is why I just say, allow the spirit to lead you. This was not well, so I came in saying this is not supposed to be for me. This was going to be for others. So, wow. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, God. That's what, you know, about a year ago when I first started the podcast, and it was Shattering the Silence. And, you know, recently, I changed the name as under Cross to Cross Conversations now. But reason why I bring it back because I had so many people tell me, you're not called to this. It's not time. This isn't your ministry. And then you start to take on those things while you're trying to push it out. Some of it gets in if you're not careful. And I don't have Kleenex, but some of it gets in when you're not careful. And because I didn't expect to need Kleenex. I mean, let's just be real. I'm going to be honest with you. So, it's amazing how how easy, if I may use that word, it is to take on an identity that wasn't meant for you to have. And you automatically forget the identity that you were born with, that God-given identity. And that graphic, that image you gave, where you said identity and it was big and it was all this stuff around it. So basically, everything around it was defining that I, right? And then when you turned it over, and then the I became big. And not only that, the feelings, the thought were small. And it gave the impression, it gave the meaning that, like you said, your thoughts are small in comparison to who God have made you to be, in the identity that God has given you. That part I didn't see. Now I've listened to your your trailer a few times, because when I first heard about it, like I said, I learned so much about it because I'd never heard identity abuse before until I met you. And when I joined your group and we were reading the book, whatever, and I listened to that trailer a few times because it was resonating, you know? And what we call imposter syndrome is simply a manifestation of that root of identity abuse.
Right.
And so I was sitting here taking all these notes because, again, I said every time I hear it, I'm page full of notes. Okay, so I'm sitting here like, oh, that's new, that's new. And I like the specific steps. You have the identity that God has given you, but you have to know that the enemy will lie to you about it every time, every day. And the thing is, just the the people who were telling me, you're not ready, you're not this, were people I trusted. That's the key. You keep it see it hits harder when it's someone who you trust that abuses you. Because if it's somebody that really didn't have any kind of anything in your life, the impact wouldn't be as great. But I like that last part, the choice. I say to people all the time, like people say, well, I fell into sin. I say, oh, you mean you chose to sin?
It's like,
You
oops,
made
I fell into
you're
sin.
right, you made a choice. But I like that. You have a choice to believe what is true, even when it doesn't feel true. Those three steps are the epitome of spiritual warfare. You just laid it out in three steps. That is 2 Corinthians 10 in three steps.
Yes,
Powerful.
and to me,
I'm
and
doing a Bible. I'm
I'm
sorry, go
totally
ahead.
I'm totally the queen of make it simple. The more simple we can make it, the easier it is for us to pull it off and to remember, okay, what's happening right now. I'm believing the enemy more than I'm believing God, and I can make
So,
a
so
choice.
that's where I was going to go. Is that a way? Because some people, they're going to be new to the term identity abuse. They may even be new to the term imposter syndrome.
Right.
How would you say, okay, someone's listening to this and, they're feeling it. How would you say they can identify or determine that they're dealing with identity abuse?
The easiest way I always tell people is to think back to the very first time that you remember thinking that negative thing about yourself. First, it's identifying the most common thing that rolls around in your head that's negative about yourself. And when you can pick that one thing and then say, go back as far as you can remember to the first time you ever remember thinking that about yourself. And usually it's a fairly clear memory because
Yes.
it's a shock to the system of, oh,
Yes.
this must be who I am. And it might have been even the second or third time you heard that and you go, oh, well, if they said that and they said that, then it must be true. But typically it's somewhere in childhood, and sadly it's somewhere around second grade. And apparently we have a bunch of bad second grade teachers out there. No offense if you're a second grade teacher, but a lot of this stuff happens somewhere in that time frame. But it can happen from a wide variety of things. It could even happen from a TV show, right? It could happen from your neighbor, the mailman. It could be anything. And being able to say, okay, there was a moment where somebody spoke or did something that made me believe something about myself And and then I say, I want you to, and so I really need people to hear this. I say, bring Jesus into that exact moment.
Yes.
So that
Yes.
exact moment. And
Yes.
sometimes I'll say, a mature adult, depending on, who the person is. But if you say, okay, my second grade teacher was humiliating me in front of the class. And so I believed that I was stupid because they did da da da. I said, okay, I want you to imagine as the teacher standing over your desk and she's looking down at you, and right as she starts to talk, Jesus walks in the room and he hears what she's saying to you, assuming it's a female. What is he going to first do? What is he going to do? And I want you to think about Jesus flipping tables in the temple. What would that Jesus do as he walks into the room and he hears this teacher totally berating you unnecessarily in front of all of the class? What is he going to do? And sadly, people who've had really bad damage will say, well, he'd probably forgive her and he would probably, I mean that's their
Mm-hmm.
tendency, right, to go down that path. And that's why I brought up this, Jesus in the temple perspective, because he's going to go in there, he's going to make her stop.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's going to do whatever it takes, right? Make her
Mm-hmm.
stop. So the first thing is, what is he going to do? The second thing is, what is he going to believe about you in that moment?
Yes. Mm.
He's going to believe that whatever she's saying is not what she should be saying, and she should be saying X instead. And that's what should be happening. But then what does he believe about you? You're a kid. You made a mistake. No big deal. It's okay.
Mm.
Try better next time, right? It's going to be a completely different. And if you take what a healthy adult or what Jesus himself would have done and said and responded to you and what he believed about you in that moment, and then ask yourself, who do you want to believe? Do you want to believe the message that you took out of the person who's being aggressive, abusive, whatever? Or do you want to believe what Jesus would have done in that same exact scenario, which would have been the best thing to do? So, like in the moment where my mom was confronting me about my dad in the couch, nobody showed up and said, hey, your dad is a liar and your mom should be believing him and you don't have to believe this about yourself. I mean, nobody showed up. But if
Right.
had
Right.
but if somebody had showed up in that moment and said, you don't have to take this into adulthood. He's a liar. He should go to jail. She did da 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 da. Life would have been completely different and I wouldn't have
Yeah.
struggled so much.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
really understanding at that moment, you get the choice. Who am I going to believe? And when you recognize the feeling, so I go back to that feeling, when you have that feeling that comes up again with that thought, oh, I shouldn't be here, I'm not adequate, I'm not, whatever that is, and you recognize the feeling, you need to say, I'm going to believe Jesus.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow, that's good. Wow. So I'm going to do exactly what you said today. As soon as we're done, I am going ahead and read Psalm 139. Absolutely. That was powerful. I just want to thank you for being here today. Again, always allow the Spirit to have his way. Clearly, I had some places that needed to be healed. So I thank you for that. I thank God for you. And I did ask you to send over your information so I can include it. But really quick, if someone wanted to reach out to you, they wanted to have you coach them, speak with them, is there a way that they can get in touch with you?
Yes, if you go to identityabuse.com, that's my main website, and it has all sorts of resources there, videos you can watch on the homepage. It has a place where you can send me a message, and yeah, everything is right there.
Okay, that's perfect. Identityabuse.com if you want to speak with Pastor Elaine. Again, powerful message today. Just remember the three steps. Identify is your identity is your God-given identity. The enemy was always challenge you probably every single day, but it is a choice to believe what God has said about you, that you're fearfully and wonderfully made, or what the enemy is trying to get you to believe. With that, we bless you. We thank you for watching Cross to Cross Conversations. Until next time, God bless. Thank you,
Thank you.
Pastor. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Cross to Cross Conversations. If this conversation resonated with you, subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, please share it with them. Remember, at life's crossroads, your voice is your power. Don't let anyone silence it. Until next time, this is Monica reminding you that where silence meets voice, freedom begins.